Hey everybody, welcome to this lesson. We've previously gone over the basics of UVs, but I want to now show you with an actual object how we would approach UV maps using, in this case, Autodesk Maya 2020. So here I have a shield that is composed of multiple objects. As you can see, we have a large disk on the outside, we have a handle, as well as the center kind of rounded point of the shield. We're going to create, even though they're separate objects, we're going to put all of these objects on the same UV map. So that's really important to kind of understand as we move forward, that all of these are going to be not combined, but they're going to be appearing on the same UV map. So I'm going to go ahead and just start by deleting all my history here, just to kind of have a fresh start to my file. And I'm going to go to my UV and UV editor. So my method is a little bit different when it comes to creating objects. You can see that the UV editor has changed over maybe even the last video that we saw. We have a lot of different types of create, cut and sew methods. They've kind of put them on the side rather than at the top point. So that's something you want to take a look at. And you can even put this in your window, like simply dragging, and we can kind of have it here. So if I don't want it here, if I want it on the side, I can do that as well. That may be actually easier. All right, and it looks good here. So let's take our attribute editor down here and so forth. All right, cool. All right, so we're going to do one main window so we can see both. All right, so we have our object, which you can see our object is kind of already laid out, but this is the square we want to get everything into. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, I know we can sit here in planar map and we can do a bunch of different things, but the first thing I'm going to do is turn on my grid. And as you can see, when I select certain objects, this is pretty UV'd, but let's say it wasn't. Let me hit automatic mapping just to kind of make a bit of a mess here. And it's really hard to see when your grid is on. You can see we have overlapping UVs, we have maybe some distortion, maybe some of the sides aren't really covered. We could even do a cylindrical map on all of these just to make it really messy. As you can see, these UVs are messed up. All right, so I typically like to turn on my kind of UV texture grid, but I also like to turn on my shading so I can kind of see what's happening. And there's a lot of different functions up here that allow us to see what's going on. And what I do is toggle on and off this picture because I want to see the grid out here, which you can see our goal is to make perfect squares, but not necessarily in here. All right, now that I have this, and I'm going to kind of keep this part of the toolkit over here, I can get started. So my method is pretty easy. And I'm going to use terms that aren't official in Maya. I like to take a picture of my object, and I usually use the camera. So I'm going to actually use camera-based projection for this. So I'm going to line up my camera straight on the object, and I'm going to make sure I'm in object mode. I'm going to highlight all the different pieces, and I'm going to simply hit camera-based. Now what this does is a few things. The first thing it does is it most likely will resolve some quick problems. So when I see something I like, in this case, this grid, we're going to need to play with this more, but I'm going to move that over. I move them out of the way. Here's the handle. And this piece looks good. So if it's good to go, I usually move it over to a specific area. I'll scale it in later, but you can see that middle piece is great. The handle needs some work, and this piece actually looks pretty good to go too, but we can play around with some of the tools. So what's happening here is because it's not, we want everything to be purple and not this pinkish color, it's because there's some overlapping UVs. So now that we have everything separated with the camera-based projection, and it's as easy as that, take a photo of it using camera-based, and then go into your UV editor and move the different shells so you can kind of work on each piece independently. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find my seam here, and I'm going to double-click on that seam. That highlights the whole edge of the seam, and I'm going to hit the cut button. Now by doing that, I can now have two shells. As you can see, we're starting to get some of that purple that I can play around with too. So the back shell, which looks pretty good, but it's still a different color. So when it's a different color, that means we need to flip our UVs. So that means everything will be backwards on this UV. So let's go ahead and find this the flip button. And I need to make this a little bigger so I can see some of these. So we're looking through, let's find, sometimes it's easier to go up to the top here. Let's modify and flip. Here it is right here. It looks like a little sailboat. So now it's purple. This one's done. So even better. I'm going to move this down here. Now, if we had any distortion, we could still play with that. But as you can see, these are perfect squares and we're good to go. Now we're going to take this, which we can see we have some overlapping UVs going on in here, and we want to unfold this one. So we're going to highlight it in right-click UV shell mode, click on it, and we're going to use some of the unfold functions that are provided within Maya. So you can see we have a few different unfold options in the unfold menu. We have optimize. So if I hit optimize, that kind of did the trick, right? We have unfold, which also gives it another attempt to kind of unfold all these edges. And this is a pretty simple model, so all of these will work. We have the unfold tool, which we can kind of paint if we have a specific area we want to kind of unfold. But because I cut that edge, it helps me. So a good rule of thumb is take a photo of it using camera-based in a way where you can see a lot of the surface, then go through and cut your seams and remove, different areas that seemingly will work correctly, and then go and unfold specific elements as you see fit. So again, we have a lot of, you can see the optimize tool kind of jacks it up a little bit. We have a lot of options. So I'm going to use the unfold. You can also go up tier to your different tools at the top, and you can use unfold as well. Up here, I got to actually select it. So let me go to shell mode here. And I think I'm in my unfold tool here. That's what's going on. There we go. So I can kind of select my UVs. And again, if I need to unfold where I see fit. So we have a lot of different tools like the brushes and whatnot that essentially do this. So now that I have this kind of unfolded, now it's time for me to place everything within the actual grid. So this is our grid. This is where we want to get everything. And I'm going to grab and hit W here, and I'm going to place these dependent on the size they are on the screen. So this is our largest thing, and I still got to do that handle, I realized. So I'm going to make this pretty large. And I'm going to scroll this down with scale. I'm going to keep it within this square, right, as close as possible. Now at this point for you all, you can use UV layout if you'd like, which is there's a layout function, Control L, and that will lay it out. But you can see there's some wasted space. So I want to kind of play around with these. This shell is pretty nice. So I will kind of shrink that as close as possible in here as I see fit. And then I may shift select, move them together, and so forth. So I think one up here is looking good. And then we'll get this back area, which, is a pretty big area too. They don't have to be exact, and there's also like different tools you'll discover that are like stack. You can see a range. I have like stack shells, I have orient, I have gather, randomize, all sorts of things. But I like this layout, so you can see none of them are overlapping, that I have a nice look here. All right, let's look at this, this kind of handle, which is kind of tricky. So once you have the handle, we have the ability to kind of play the same game. So I'm going to go to the edge because I've already kind of laid it out. And I'm going to just double click. And I'm going to kind of remove some of these edges. All right, so we have those edges. I can even shift and right click to see if I want to move or sew. I can also cut. So shift right click cut, or I could go in here and hit the cut button. I can also hit cut right here or hit shift X. You have a lot of options. I'm going to go back to UV shell mode and see if I cut them correctly. I didn't. I must be missing something. And it looks like I am. So I need to cut this seam and this seam. So cut that as well. And that should, and if not, we can do it again, release our face. So worst case, go back to edge mode here. I'm holding shift and I'm just grabbing all my edges for this piece. And it's imperative that I lay this out as cleanly as possible so I can get a good texture. So now I definitely have them. I cut, and I bet you it will remove. Yep, there it is. All right, now you can see this is a distorted piece of geometry. If I go back to texture mode, you can see the front piece is looking pretty good, but this side piece isn't. What we can do here is actually use that camera-based projection again if we really want, and you'll see that it fixes it up pretty quickly. I can do the same thing with the other side. Hit 4 on my keyboard here in this case, and I can grab the edge, and just make sure you're grabbing just the front edge here. Double click here, we'll grab contiguous edges, and we have a few unique ones here, but that's okay. And bum 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 bum, that looks pretty gnarly. I like it. And it looks like we may have accidentally grabbed the edges on the other side, so I'm going to hold control and select those out. So I think I have that shell fully selected. Hold shift, hold the right mouse button and do cut. Go back to UV shell, and sure enough, that one is set. Now we know we have to flip this because it's the wrong color, so we can hit flip, and then we know we have this one, which we can easily use our camera-based projection. So UVs aren't too bad. This is a case where if we really wanted to like stack these, we can select them both and say stack shells. We could orient them so I could rotate this shell. Let's see if I can navigate to my rotate tool in here. I'll go to transform, rotate, boom, boom. And you can see they kind of line up. They're not exactly modeled symmetrically. So, it's really up to you if you want to rotate those or keep them as you see fit. This one we'll use the unfold. Let's see what happens. There we go, pretty clean. Doesn't matter if the squares are straight. And then we can use the unfold on this one as well. And now we have perfect squares. How about that? So now these are our handle pieces. We could move and sew these together. So as you can see, if I grab a specific edge, it will align to a specific edge here. That's not something I really want to do on this one in particular. I want to kind of keep them separately. So I'm going to kind of just arrange them in a way, and I may just rotate this one just because I'm a little anal retentive. Because I know the handle is just going to be like one color. I may just arrange them like this and keep them relatively the same square size, because when I paint, I want the texture to be the same on them. So you can see the squares kind of match up, and then grab them as a group, scale them down, and we'll put them over here. So I've really maximized my space now. And a good trick is if you don't think you're in the square, if you turn on your texture mode again, if this appears, that means you're in that square. So if I roll it, if I move it slightly, you see how that disappeared? That means I'm in my square now. And that's essentially how I UV out an object. So what I can do right now is I can turn this off, but I can highlight my whole object and I can export this. So highlight, we're going to say, we're going to just go to this little camera button right here, make sure everything's highlighted, and hit the little snapshot. And we'll put this out to our desktop to UV mapping, and we'll call this Shield Layout UV. We're going to make sure that we set it to a document like a JPEG. We're going to make sure we use powers of 2. So this could be 1024 by 1024. This could be 512 by 512, 256. This could be 4098 if we had a really fast computer. I'm going to keep it 1024. So I like that. Or pardon me, 2048 if I can do my math. All right, so now that I have that, this just means it's going to be in that one tile. I'm going to hit apply and close. And what that will do is give us that coloring book page that we can fill in and then apply to the color map. And that's how you UV out an object. Hope you enjoyed this lesson. And this is the method that you can use for most objects. It will get harder when you start seaming and sewing things together. But this is a really great place to start. So if your model is built cleanly, this is a very simple process. If your model has n-gons, a bunch of welded faces that maybe aren't welded correctly, it can be a real mess. But we'll talk about that further as we go. Hope everyone enjoyed the lesson, and I'll catch you next time.